Summer is upon us. Do you want to stay cool and dry at night? Try bamboo sheets from CozyEarth.com. Not only do you get a good night's sleep and stay cool and dry, but also you get to save 21% off just by using our code at checkout. InfoGo. And they have a 100-night sleep trial, so it's a win-win. If you don't like them, send them back, but I promise you'll fall in love with them. And while you're over there, check out their socks. They have a whole line of apparel. And that's CozyEarth.com. Use our code InfoGo at checkout to save 21% off. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Wade.
And I'm Kat.
And that makes this Info on the Go.
Feeding your curiosity wherever you go.
So today we're going to be talking about the scientific method. Anyway, let's just get into it. What do you think?
Sounds good.
All right, let's break this down scientifically using the scientific method. What do you think?
Indubitably.
All right. So for most of human history, people were wrong about almost everything. The universe revolving around the Earth to miasma. But anyway, the strange part is they were absolutely sure they were right. Not casually mistaken that you could get sick from miasma. Not totally wrong, but not totally right either. So, not casually mistaken, not guessing in the dark, but they were confident across generations, convinced that their explanations of reality were correct. But the real limitation wasn't intelligence, it was that humanity didn't yet have a reliable system for checking whether its ideas matched the world. They were no controlled experiments, no peer review, no structured testing, just observation, tradition, and the most powerful force of all, a good explanation that sounded convincing enough or to stop you guessing and asking questions.
So, take medicine, for example. For over 2,000 years in parts of Europe and beyond, illness was often explained through the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health was thought to be a balancing act between these internal fluids, and sickness meant that balance had gone wrong. The response wasn't antibiotics or hygiene, but treatments like bloodletting, where doctors drained blood from patients to resolve balance. It was used for fevers, headaches, infections, and countless other conditions. Even major historical figures were treated this way. George Washington, for instance, was heavily bloodlet during his final illness in 1799. And a modern analysis suggests the procedure may have worsened its condition. The key point isn't that people weren't careless, but that they were following the most respected medical knowledge available at the time.
Didn't they try to use sheep's blood or something other for him as well?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't hear about that one.
Yeah, but I know bloodletting was a big deal. And pretty much, could you imagine going to the doctor with a headache and they're like, yeah, do some bloodletting?
No, that would be insane. But I mean, there are also uses even today for leeches,
Okay, put it on the shopping list. We'll do one on leeches.
medicinal leeches, or just leeches in general.
Let's just do both. Let's just
Okay,
make a full episode about leeches.
sounds good.
The blood-sucking parasite. It's not a parasite. I don't know. It's an animal, I guess. But
I guess we'll figure it out.
yeah, let's figure out if it's a parasite or an animal. I do know that it's going to suck blood regardless. Actually, I know it's going to suck regardless.
There you go.
All right. And it's not aliens. It's leeches. Okay. So look upward, and the same pattern appears in astronomy. For more than 1,000 years, the dominant model of the universe placed, well, Earth at the center of everything. The sun, the moon, the planets, the stars, well, they all revolved around Earth. That was the idea. But this wasn't a fringe idea. It was carefully supported by mathematics, philosophy, and, well, cultural authority. And it really aligned with both everyday perception and religious worldview. It endured for centuries because there simply weren't tools precise enough to challenge it in any kind of meaningful way. The universe appeared to agree until, well, it didn't, and someone figured out that the sun is actually in the center of our solar system.
Even lightning was misunderstood. Across many cultures, it was interpreted as divine communication, often as anger or punishment from the gods. A storm wasn't just weather, it was intention written across the sky. That interpretation held for centuries until experiments began to suggest something more physical was happening. In the 1750s, Benjamin Franklin's famous kite experiment demonstrated that lightning was connected to electricity, shifting it from the realm of divine emotion to natural phenomenon. It didn't just explain lightning, it rewired how humans understood the sky itself.
Even in something as simple as falling objects, assumptions went, well, unchallenged. Aristotle, well, he proposed that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones, a claim that, well, sounds intuitive and therefore went largely unquestioned for nearly 2,000 years. It wasn't until figures like Galileo Galilei systematically began testing motion that this idea was seriously challenged, revealing that objects fall at the same rate, regardless of mass, when air resistance is removed. A simple test overturned a deeply rooted belief that you could drop a bowling ball and a penny at the same time.
Layered across all of this was a broader structure of certainty. Kings were believed to rule by divine authority, not just political power, but cosmic legitimacy. Questioning that order wasn't just disagreement, it could be seen as challenging the fabric of reality itself.
And when you step back, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore here. These weren't isolated mistakes. They were entire systems of certainty built without reliable methods of verification, and they existed everywhere across cultures and centuries because humanity had not yet discovered a way to, well, be consistent and separate belief from reality.
Which leads to the central question at the heart of the story. How did humanity break out of that loop? How did we move from inherited certainty to tested knowledge? And who made the radical decision that evidence should ever matter more than authority? Because somewhere in that shift, something unprecedented happened. Humanity didn't just learn new facts about the world, it learned a new way to find them. And that process, the scientific method, may be the most important invention humans ever created for surviving their own certainty.
Yeah, so let's dig into it. Humans have always tried to understand the world around us, right? From the very beginning, there was a deep need to explain what was happening in the sky, in the body, and in nature itself. Before there was laboratories or controlled experiments, there were frameworks built from what people could observe, remember, or pass down orally. Mythology, oral tradition, religious cosmology, and systems of spirits, gods, and omens, well, they all emerged as early attempts to make sense of the universe that felt active, unpredictable, and often very personal.
Thunder, for example, was commonly interpreted as the voice or anger of the gods. An eclipse wasn't just an astronomical alignment, but a cosmic warning or disruption in the order of the heavens. Disease was often understood as a curse or punishment, or an internal imbalance caused by unseen forces. Even weather was frequently tied to divine mood, as if storms and droughts were emotional responses from something watching above.
But it's important to ground this properly. None of this came from ignorance or carelessness. There were serious attempts at understanding reality using the tools that existed at the time. People were doing well, the most rational thing available at the time, building explanations from patterns they could see without the ability to, you know, kind of dig into that testing whether those explanations were actually true or not.
Across early civilizations, this drive to understand was everywhere. The Egyptians tracked seasons and built complex medical systems. The Babylonians carefully recorded celestial movements and developed early astronomy. Chinese astronomers mapped the sky with remarkable precision over centuries. The Maya created detailed calendar systems that tracked time with extraordinary complexity. And these societies were not passive observers of the world, they were meticulous recorders of it.
But there was a critical limitation shared across all of them. Observation alone is not the same as a system for testing truth. You can watch patterns, record cycles, and, well, build explanations that fit what you see, but without a method for, testing and challenging those ideas, belief, well, it kind of tends to stabilize rather than evolve. And so, even with careful observation, many early explanations, well, they remained unchallenged for centuries, becoming part of inherited certainty rather than corrected understanding.
So, a shift begins as human thought starts to move from pure explanation towards structure and rule. Some early thinkers began asking a different kind of question. Not just, what does this mean, but what if nature behaves according to consistent laws? This is a subtle but powerful change in direction, where the world is no longer only interpreted through stories, but through patterns that might be universally true.
And then you have key figures that start to emerge in this transition. Thinkers like Aristotle, Pythagoras, and Democritus, well, they began shaping ways of understanding reality through reason rather than myth alone. New intellectual tools, well, they start to take shape. Logic becomes a way to build structured arguments. Geometry turns space into something measurable and predictable. And rational explanation starts to, well, compete with supernatural interpretation. And for the first time, humans are trying to, well, build models of reality that feel stable across different situations.
But there's a critical limitation embedded in this system. These ideas are often debated and refined throughout thought alone rather than being rigorously tested against the physical world. In many cases, philosophy advances by argument more than experiment. Reality is described, but not yet consistently challenged.
Aristotle, well, he cast a really long shadow over this period. For nearly 2,000 years, his ideas become, well, authority across large parts of the world. His explanations are detailed, structured, and persuasive enough that they are treated almost like final answers. One of his claims that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones, well, it goes largely unquestioned for, well, centuries. Not because people were incapable of testing it, but because, well, there was little pressure to doubt his authority. I mean, after all, if a great thinker has already explained how nature works, why would you assume he might be wrong?
And so a pattern forms. Authority begins to replace verification. Knowledge becomes something to inherit rather than something to test. A system of reasoning is born, structured, powerful, and deeply influential, but still missing its most important ingredient: a consistent method for checking whether its conclusions match reality itself.
But then the Islamic Golden Age happens. A major turning point, often, well, skipped and simplified histories, take place not in sudden revolution, but in a careful preservation, translation, and expansion of knowledge. Across centuries, scholars build on earlier Greek works, translating and refining texts that might otherwise have been lost. And alongside this preservation comes, well, real advancement. Mathematics becomes more precise. Astronomy, well, it grows more systematic. And medicine, it develops increasingly structured approaches to the human body. Knowledge is no longer just inherited, it is being actively reshaped.
Within this broader intellectual environment, one figure stands out with unusual clarity: Ibn al Hathan, also known in the Latin world as Al Hasan. Working in the Islamic Golden Age, he makes a shift in thinking that quietly reshapes the foundation of how knowledge itself should be built. His core breakthrough is simple but radical for its time. Do not trust authority. Test reality.
Instead of relying on explanations that were passed down, he designs experiments to, well, interrogate how vision and light actually behave. In his study of optics, he demonstrates that perception is not just passive reception, but something that can be analyzed, tested, and understood through control conditions. Light behaves consistently. Vision follows rules that can be examined, and claims about nature should not be accepted because they sound correct, but because they are demonstrated.
This leads to one of the earliest clear expressions of what would later become experimental science. Reality must be asked to repeat itself, not once, not accidentally, but reliably and under consistent conditions. In other words, truth is not something you declare, it is something you test until it holds.
So, in what Cat likes to call the unhinged time in Europe, Europe during the Middle Ages is often flattened into a simple story, but the reality is more complex. It is not intellectually empty, but structurally constrained in ways that shape how knowledge is produced and shaped. Religious authority plays a central role in defining what is considered acceptable truth. Literacy is limited, meaning written knowledge is, well, it's concentrated in institutions rather than widely distributed. On top of that, Europe is repeatedly disrupted by plague, war, and, well, political instability, all of which make long term scientific development difficult to stabilize. Much of what people understand about the world is still inherited knowledge, passed down through tradition rather than continuously tested.
And yet, even within these constraints, something important is happening. Universities begin to emerge as formal centers of learning, where scholars gather to study, debate, and preserve knowledge. Translation movements, especially those bringing Arabic, Greek, and Latin texts into wider circulation, reintroduced and expanded access to classical ideas. Slowly, intellectual life becomes more interconnected, and knowledge begins to move across cultural boundaries rather than staying isolated.
Within this environment, attention starts to build. It is not a simple clash, but a growing friction between two ways of deciding what is true: authority and observation, tradition and inquiry. On one side, truth is something established by inherited credibility, institutional approval, or long-standing doctrine. But on the other, a different approach begins to take shape where claims about the world must be increasingly examined against what can actually be observed and tested. And it is important not to reduce this to a simplistic conflict between science and religion. That framing, well, it's too clean for what actually is happening. Instead, what is forming is a deeper philosophical divide, competing systems for deciding what counts as truth. And I say before we get into that scientific revolution that breaks open, I say let's go grab a Coke.
I'll get a Pepsi. Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
I came across big fork brands recently, and it's become one of those finds you actually want to tell people about, and you don't find that often. Okay. They're doing bacon sausage, plus these really solid pork jerky snacks and Chicago style sauces. Basically, upgrade anything you throw them on: burgers, hot dogs, fries. Throw it on there. It works.
But I bet it's packed full of junk.
Actually, it's made with clean ingredients and real care. That's small batch with no shortcuts, and people are obsessed with the flavor. You can go over to bigforkbrands.com, use our code INFOGO at checkout, and get 20% off anything on the site.
You can find the link and our code in the show notes.
Now that we're back, the scientific revolution, reality breaks open. So the system begins to fracture. It doesn't happen all at once, it happens in steps that feel, at the time, almost unthinkable. First comes Copernicus. His idea is simple and structured, but enormous in consequence. Earth is not the center of everything. The sun does not revolve around us. Instead, Earth itself is just one planet moving through a larger system. This is more than an astronomical adjustment. It's a psychological rupture. For centuries, humanity had lived with the assumption that it occupied a central privileged position in the architecture of reality. Now that assumption begins to collapse, and the universe does not appear to be arranged around human existence after all.
We're going to have to do an episode on that because there's a lot more to that than just that. Then comes Galileo. and with him, a shift in what it even means to know something, because the telescope, the telescope, well, it turns the sky from something that people just once interpreted into something that, well, is now observed. And what it reveals is, well, it's quietly destabilizing, because Jupiter has moons that orbit, meaning not everything in the heavens circles Earth. Venus shows phases, matching a heliocentric model, which contradicts older assumptions. The moon itself is not even perfect, unchanging sphere, right? But rough, uneven, and marked with imperfections. Each observation lands like a correction against inherited certainty.
The key shift here is not just what Galileo saw, but what his method represents. Observation begins to override authority. What can be seen starts to matter more than what has been declared. And that creates tension that is not just scientific, but cultural and psychological. So, for a long time, seeing the world incorrectly was acceptable because there was no way to reliably change it. But once instruments extended human perception, error becomes visible. And once error becomes visible, it becomes difficult to defend.
Then comes Kepler, who adds something new again. He takes observation and binds it into mathematics, showing that planetary motion is not random or purely symbolic, but structured and predictable. Orbits follow well consistent patterns that can be described with precision. The universe begins to shift from something interpreted through meaning and, passed down into something that behaves like a system governed by discoverable laws. And with Kepler, the sky stops being a story and starts becoming a structure.
So, Bacon, Descartes, and the formalization of method. Well, Francis Bacon enters as the system begins to solidify into something recognizable as a method rather than just scattered breakthroughs. His contribution is not a single discovery, but a way of organizing how discovery should happen. Knowledge in his framing should not begin with inherited assumptions or elegant reasoning alone, but with careful engagement with the world itself. Observe, hypothesize, test, repeat. At the core of it is a simple but disruptive idea. Stop assuming you understand how reality works and start checking whether you actually do.
So, this really marks a subtle but profound shift in the direction of human thought. Truth is no longer something primarily constructed from authority or logic alone. It becomes something that must be earned through contact with evidence, through repeated testing, and through the willingness to be wrong in order to become, well, less wrong over time. The willingness to be wrong should apply to everyone.
Absolutely. It's best to learn that early.
Yeah.
Around the same period, René Descartes pushes the other half of the transformation. Where Bacon emphasizes experimentation, Descartes introduces a different discipline, systematic doubt. He argues that nearly everything can be questioned sensory perception, inherited belief, even long standing intellectual traditions. By stripping away assumptions one by one, he attempts to find a foundation of knowledge that cannot easily be shaken.
Taken together, these two form a powerful pairing. Bacon builds knowledge upon from observation and experiment, while De Cortes, well, clears the ground by questioning what can be trusted in the first place. One pushes toward testing reality, the other, well, toward integrating thought itself. And the result is not yet a finished system, but something close to a new philosophy of knowing. And this is really a shift where truth is no longer defined by who said it or how elegant it sounds, but increasingly by whether it survives scrutiny, doubt, and repeated testing against the world.
Now, Isaac Newton enters the picture. Newton arrives as the moment everything starts to lock into place, where earlier thinkers built pieces of the system observation here, mathematics there, experimentation somewhere else. Isaac Newton brings them together into a single unified framework. He treats the universe not as something that shifts between explanations depending on culture or philosophy, but as something governed by consistent, discoverable rules that apply everywhere all the time.
So he combines mathematics, careful observation, and predictive reasoning in one structure: motion, falling objects, planetary orbits, things that once felt separate or mysterious. Well, they began to behave like parts of the same underlying system. Gravity, it stops being a vague tendency and becomes a measurable force that can be described, calculated, and used to predict future behavior. His formulation, which, F equals G, we could do all that stuff. You can Google that, but we're going to simplify it here. His calculation really was gravity depends on the size of the objects and drops off fast with distance. That's dumbed way down.
With this kind of formulation, something profound happens. The universe is no longer just interpreted after the fact, like a story we tell about what already happened. It becomes predictive. If you know the conditions, you can calculate the outcome before it occurs. For the first time in human history, reality starts to look like something that can be computed rather than guessed. The world does not change into something simpler, but human understanding of it becomes structured enough that nature begins to feel legible, almost mechanical in its consistency.
This method, well, it begins to spread into everything: medicine, electricity, engineering, industry, flight, vaccines, computing, space, everywhere. Entire fields that once relied on guesswork, tradition, or trial and error, well, they begin to recognize around the same quiet discipline. Test what you think, check what happens, adjust, and try again. And a shift starts to take place beneath all of it. Knowledge stops being just something you understand. It becomes something you can use, something that, well, bends the world, something that builds machines, cures diseases, sends humans into the sky, and then, well, maybe into outer space.
Into outer space, you say.
Yeah, aliens. Gonna go see the aliens.
Ah, it turns into applied power, and in a compressed flash of history, it looks like a montage. Steam engines breathing life into factories, electric light pushing back at night, antibiotics rewriting survival, rockets breaking gravity's hold, silicone forming the foundation of modern computation, and invisible networks stitching the planet together in real time. But underneath every leap, every invention, every breakthrough, the same invisible process is still running, unchanged, almost understated in its simplicity. Test, correct, repeat.
What is the scientific method, actually? Observation. Something in the world catches your attention.
Question. You ask, why is it happening?
Hypothesize. You propose a possible explanation, right?
You test that idea against reality.
Data. You record what actually happens.
Conclusion. You see whether the idea holds up or breaks.
Replication. And others try it again to see if what you had still works.
At the core of it all is a quiet principle. Science is designed to fail safely because failure isn't treated as collapse, it's treated as information, a correction signal from reality itself. And in that system, correction isn't the opposite of progress, it is progress.
Yes, but what happens when the method goes wrong? The system is very powerful, but it has never been immune to human distortion because the scientific method doesn't operate in a vacuum. It runs through people, institutions, incentives, egos, funding, and sometimes pressure that, well, kind of tends to help bend results without breaking the appearance of rigor. History has a few uncomfortable reminders of this.
In the mid 20th century, tobacco companies funded decades of research designed to cast doubt on the health risks of smoking. Studies were selectively designed, inconvenient findings were downplayed, and uncertainty was amplified on purpose. The goal wasn't discovery, it was delay. Delay of regulation, delay of consequences, delay of truth becoming undeniable.
Yeah, it was good for you until it wasn't.
Ah, when ethics caught up.
Mm. Early in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the eugenics movement, well, it misused emerging ideas in genetics and heredity to justify deeply harmful social policies. In places like the United States and Europe, scientific language was used to, well, support forced sterilizations and racial hierarchies. It wasn't failure or equations, it was a failure of interpretation, ethics, and human judgment wrapped all around science.
Even in modern medicine, problems can emerge in more subtle ways. Clinical trials that aren't fully representative, biased sample groups, publication bias where positive results are more likely to be published than negative ones, or statistical manipulation that makes weak effects look stronger than they really are. On paper, everything can still look scientific. In practice, the picture can be distorted.
And occasionally, outright fraud appears and data fabricated, because results they can be exaggerated or conclusions forced to fit expectations instead of evidence. These cases are rare, but they matter because they reveal something important. The method itself does not police intent. And that leads to the key idea. The scientific method is not corrupt. Humans are.
Science is not the truth itself. It's not a guaranteed finish line. And it's something more powerful and more fragile at the same time. A mechanism designed to drag human understanding closer to truth over time, even when individuals, institutions, or entire eras get it wrong along the way.
Compare the biggest inventions humanity tends to celebrate. The wheel, which changed how we move across distance and reshaped trade, transportation, and the scale of civilization itself.
The printing press, for example, which didn't just spread books, but accelerated the spread of ideas, pulling knowledge out of monasteries and scribes' hands and into a wider world at the speed humanity had never experienced before.
And electricity, which transformed night into, well, usable time, powered machines that redefined industry and eventually became the invisible backbone of modern life, from lighting homes to running entire cities.
And the internet, which compressed distance again, turning global communication into something nearly instantaneous, connecting billions of minds into a constantly active network of information.
Each of these had a mega impact on civilization. Each one changed how humans do things. But the argument here is something slightly stranger.
The scientific method may matter more than all of them, not because it builds machines directly, but because it builds the conditions that make those machines possible in the first place. It's the underlying engine that allows invention itself to keep accelerating.
Without it, well, the will remains a tool. With it, tools become systems. Systems become technologies. Technologies become revolutions. And so the reflection becomes bigger than invention.
The scientific method gave humanity something rare, a way to question authority without collapse, a way to challenge tradition without losing structure, and a way to test reality instead of inheriting it unexamined. It slowly replaces certainty with evidence, not by destroying confidence, but by making it conditional on proof. And most importantly, it introduces something almost paradoxical. In human history, a system that openly admits it can be wrong and because of that improves over time.
It is imperfect, right? It is unfinished. It is still shaped by human bias and limitation. But it may also be the closest thing humanity has ever built to a self-correcting truth engine. And it's quietly refining how we understand everything from falling objects to the fabric of the universe itself.
So, yeah, turns out the greatest invention in human history wasn't a machine, it was a method for catching ourselves being confidently incorrect.
And we've been running it ever since. Bad news for certainty.
Good news for reality.
Hmm, okay, I can go with that. So the scientific method, I'm pretty sure you learned that in high school or somewhere, right?
So, somewhere in grade school, I'm pretty sure.
I still found this to be very interesting. As a grade school person, I was like, the scientific method, what? But the older I got, it's like, wow, it really did change humanity.
It did. It did in a very big way. And I don't think we give it enough credit.
Yeah, I don't either, because if without it, we would still say that the Earth is at the center of the solar system.
It's probably still flat too. Oh,
Yeah.
wait,
I think aliens came down and gave us this technology.
indeed.
No,
Indeed.
I'm just playing. Yeah, no, I really think the scientific method was one of the greatest inventions of all time. Personally, that's that's me speaking.
Me
Okay.
too.
Yeah. I think the scientific method was the most important invention of all time, second to Coke.
Second to Pepsi.
What? No, no, no.
Yeah, Pepsi had its own naval fleet. What? Absolutely not.
So I guess if Coke and Pepsi did go to war, Pepsi would technically win,
Technically.
technically. But aliens would come down and help Coke out, so win-win.
Right. If you would like to support this podcast, tell a friend and help get the word out.
We just lost a lot of people. If you would like to support this show, you can do so at Patreon or take advantage of our sponsors. Both of those links are in the show notes.
And as always, William and I want to thank you for listening.
Whether you've been with us from day one or just tuning in,
Join the Facebook group at Info on the Go
over there you can get to know us.
or ask us a question.
But whatever you do, stop and hit that follow button wherever you're listening to this podcast.
Send us some fan mail using the link in the show notes or leave a review.
Kat and I love that stuff. You can email us both directly at,
infoonthegopodcast@gmail.com.
and we read all of those. And you can find all of this in the show notes. Till next time.
Stay curious.
If your stomach's been off lately, like bloating, reflux, or just not feeling right, there's a simpler way to get back on track.
With Professor B's Digestive Aid, which is an all natural blend of pure honey and ancient apitherapy, a herb rooted in Roman tradition. You know how at least they had some things right, right? It's designed to gently support and balance your digestion.
No long ingredient list, no harsh additives, just two powerful, time tested ingredients working together. It's even the same formula used to help cancer patients manage digestive discomfort.
And right now, you can get an exclusive 10% off any product. Just use our code INFOGO at checkout.